Please be seated. The court is now back in session. As the chamber informs the parties and the general public, for the next session, we will hear the testimony of a civil party, TCCP 82, and the chamber also received a request from Evidentiary. Document E231/1 through his defense counsel to waive his direct presence in hearing the testimony of 14 civil parties, including TCCP 82. As Mr. Evidentiary requests to waive his direct presence in hearing the testimony of these certain civil parties due to his health reason, the chamber decides to hear the testimony of this particular civil party, that is TCCP 82, without the presence of Evidentiary pursuant to Rule 81.5 of the internal rules of the ECCC. Court officer, could you invite the civil party TCCP 82 into the courtroom? President, good afternoon, Mr. Civil Party. What is your name? Civil Party, my name is Misaran. Thank you. Question, can you tell us your date of birth? Response, I was born on the 12th of May 1949. Thank you. Question, where is your place of birth? Response, I was born in Bokmon village, Bokmon commune, Rumdu district, Svay Rieng province. Thank you. Question, Mr. Misaran, where is your current address and occupation? Response, I lived in Phnom Penh and I work in a medical field. What is your father's name? Response, his name is Miss Cow, not Cat as stated in the victim information form. Thank you. Question, what is your mother's name? Response, her name is Chiang. Thank you. Are you married? If so, what is your wife's name and how many children do you have? Response, I am married. My wife's name is Mien Kum Lit. We had one We have one child. She was 8 months pregnant when Phnom Penh fell. Thank you. So, are you referring to the fact that currently you are a widow? Response: I decide not to marry again. Thank you. Lead co-lawyers, pursuant to Internal Rule 91b, the floor will be given first to the lead co-lawyers to put a question to this civil party before other parties. The time allocation for the lead co-lawyers and the prosecution is 1 session. That is the maximum time allocation for the 2 parties. Mr. Misaran, in your capacity as a civil party in this proceeding, you will be given an opportunity to express your statement of suffering and the damages inflicted upon you, including physical, psychological, and material. Whether it was a direct consequence of the crimes committed and that it eventually realized, and which were the cause for you to apply it as a civil party to this case, in particular related to the facts alleged against the accused. I refer to the facts and the crimes committed during the Democratic Cambodia regime. The lead co-lawyers for civil party, you may take the floor.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. President. On behalf of the civil parties, it is Christine Martineau who will put questions to the civil party.
President, yes, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, Mr. President. First of all, Your Honors and all of the Assembly here present today, and good afternoon, Mr. Miasaran. We are going to start by speaking about your situation before 17 April 1975. You state in your application referred as and it is a very short record, D22/118, and the first ERN 0036-2203, French ERN Khmer 0036-2176, and English 0036-2196. And you say that you belong to, or you are a graduate of the 8th class in nursing school. So we therefore can conclude that you went to nursing school, and until 1975, or before 1975, you were already a nurse. So can you provide us, can you tell us, give us your professional history before 17 April 1975? What was your professional history before that date?
Thank you, Mr. President. I attended a state medical school in 1969 and I left in 1972. So I completed my medical education at the time, and after I left that medical school, I worked at the Praket Mili Hospital in Phnom Penh. I work at the tuberculosis building.
Merci.
Thank you. And you stayed in Phnom Penh until 1975 in this hospital. So what was this hospital, first of all? And were you transferred or sent, let's say, to other hospitals afterwards?
Preket Mili Hospital was the second largest state hospital in Phnom Penh. It was second after the Soviet hospital. And I worked in the Preket Mili Hospital. I did not change until the time that I had to join the military, that is to become a soldier. That was in 1973. So in fact I stayed and worked at the Preket Mili until the time that I went to become a soldier.
Quand vous dites
And when you say that you became a soldier, does this mean that you had joined the army, or were you there as a medic? What was your situation in the army? And where did you do your military service, so to speak?
It was an obligation demanded by the state that all the medical staff had to become a soldier for 18 months. And as I was a medical staff, when I joined the military, I became a medic to engage in that obligation.
D'accord. Et vous avez
Okay, and where were you sent to?
No, I was not sent to. During the time that I fulfilled that military obligation for 18 months, during my session, there were 150 of us. We were sent to the medical office, and then there was a recruitment for the selection of the place to be assigned to, starting from number 1. I was in the 10th place as I chose Sisopon, because at that time I thought that Sisopon area was not the fierce intensive battlefield. So I decided to select Sisopon as my choice, and I engaged in the training there, military training there.
Did you work as a medic as well when you were in the army, or were you just a soldier?
In the training center, the military training center for the 4th Infantry, there was a kind of not really a pharmacy, but a place where I could treat people there, because a lot of newly recruited soldiers were sent there.
And when did you return? When was your military service over? When did you return to Phnom Penh, and how did you return to Phnom Penh?
In late 1974, I concluded my military service for 18 months, so I returned to Phnom Penh. And during the time that I performed my military duty in Sisapon, I met my wife and I got married. And I returned to Phnom Penh in late 1974. I was flown back to Phnom Penh.
Avec elle?
Did your wife accompany you?
Yes, she accompanied me. She was pregnant by then.
Quand vous êtes rentré,
And when you returned to Phnom Penh, what did you do? Where did you work?
Upon my arrival in Phnom Penh, I did not return to work at the Kalmat hospital yet. The regulation from Sisapon was that we shall gather all together at a location at Borai Kaila. And that was also a location which was similar to a hospital because there were 5 operating theaters and I worked there.
Monsieur Meas Saran,
Now, perhaps it was an oversight on my part, or you forgot to mention this, but were you a civil servant? Had you been assigned or transferred by the administration?
Yes, I was a civil servant. At the time, the government sent me to Swai Sisapon, and upon my return, the government also included me in the list of civil servants, and I was attached to Borai Kaila. It was the surgeon center, and there were 5 operating offices over there.
est-ce que ce centre existait?
Was the center up and running prior to your departure from Sisapon? I'm referring, of course, to Borai Kaila.
That I did not know. When I went to Sisapon, I think that the place was not yet up and running. But upon my return from Sisapon, after 18 months, I came to that place, and that place was new. And I think that place had just been established.
Est-ce que vous pouvez... Pardon. Est-ce que vous...
Can you please provide this chamber with a few explanations regarding that hospital that was established? Do you believe that in 1974, why it was set up, and how it staffed how it was staffed by the medical personnel in the city?
Actually, it was not really functioning like a hospital per se. It was the surgeon center, and it was under the control of the soldier, drainage rather. And there were bombardments on Phnom Penh city at that time, so the bombing was everywhere, and people were injured and some were killed. So that was the place to receive the victims of the bombardments. So those who got injured in the bombardments were sent to Boracay triage, and that was not actually a hospital, it was a mere center, an emergency center to receive the wounded. It was the only place where the wounded were sent.
Est-ce que cet hôpital
Let's just refer to it as a hospital. Did it receive only soldiers, or did it also treat civilians?
នៅកន្លែង
At that center, they received all kinds of the wounded. I could not distinguish whether or not the victims were the soldiers or the civilians. The government at that time designated that center to receive the wounded from the bombardment or those who were the victims of the rocket shelling. So they received the victims, the wounded, regardless of their status. So there could have been both military personnel as well as civilians.
Comment fonctionnait l'hôpital?
How did the hospital operate? You referred to 5 operating theaters. Now, were there a certain number of surgeons or physicians, healthcare providers, nurses, medical staff who were employed throughout the hospital?
Now let us assume that that place was the hospital, and it was under the control by General Kun Sun Seun. He was the brigadier general, and he was in charge of the operating theater, and he was the person in charge. There were many medical personnel. There are, of course, 5 operating theaters, but that does not necessarily mean that there were only 5 personnel working there. There were many other medical personnel. And at that time, the government made it public, announcing to medical school to send the students to come and work in this center. So at that time, there were many medical doctors assisting in this center, and there were great influx of patients and the wounded who suffered from the bombardments and fighting in the city.
Les jours précédant le 17
During the days leading up to April 17th, to your mind, what was the situation like? Were you aware of the fact that the Khmer Rouge were poised to capture Phnom Penh? Were you in the midst of preparing for such a possibility, at least within the hospital premises? Were you given any orders in one manner or another, or any instructions to deal with eventual problems?
In the hospital at the time, there was no special arrangement following the fall of Phnom Penh, but it was a few days after the fall of Phnom Penh. The overall situation in Phnom Penh was indescribable because people were terrified. They were terrified on the one hand of the bombardment, and on the other hand they were also terrified of the influx of people from the countryside. And if you were in that situation, you would see situation was panicky and chaos at that time, and people were terrified. They were afraid of the bombing, and some people were a bit relaxed and happy because they thought that the Khmer Rouge would eventually conquer the city, and then there would be no longer war in the country. So some of them were happy because they were expecting that the situation would be better after the conquered by the Khmer Rouge.
Je ne sais pas si c'est moi qui ai mal entendu.
I just wonder if there was a misunderstanding. Are you referring to the situation prior to the 17th of April? Is this correct? Can you just confirm this once again? Because I believe that I heard that you were referring to the situation after the fall of Phnom Penh.
If I understand your question correctly, you ask me what the situation was like before the 17th of April 1975, and I testified that prior to the 17th April 1975, the Phnom Penh dweller and myself is included. I am still alive now. At that time, it was on the night of the 16th of April 1975, and the next morning was the 17th of April 1975. That night I was still working. I came to the upper story of the buildings, and I overlooked to Troi Chongwa Bridge. There was a fire burning out over there, and the building were being set on fires because of the bombardment and things like that. And it came to my mind immediately that the situation would be better, the Khmer Rouge would conquer this war. But I also observed the general situation in the city was that people were on constant fear because of the ongoing bombardments and shelling of the city. And it was my hope, and I think that everybody at that time shared my hope as well, that there would be no more war once this situation was over.
Vous nous parlez de...
You talked about the nights of the 16th and 17th of April, and it would appear that you were on duty at the hospital those evenings. On the morning of the 17th of April, how did you learn about the entry of the Khmer Rouge into Phnom Penh? How did the events unfold?
The whole night of the 16th of April 1975, my colleagues working at the center at Boracay, we received a lot of victims, the wounded at that time. There were ongoing influx of victims, and there were ambulance going back and forth into the premise of the center. And the next morning, well, actually, at night, I heard the gunfires and shelling and bombings everywhere, particularly toward the end or toward the north part of the building. and it came from the south as well. So I wanted to know what was going on, so I went up to the upper story of the building. I looked toward the area around Troyongwa Bridge because I heard the bombing over there that was getting stronger and stronger, and I looked over there and I saw fires everywhere over there. So I saw that the situation was the worst. And actually, I finished my work shift on the 16th of April, but the person who was supposed to change the shift with me had not arrived, so I had to stay behind a little further. And in addition, there were incoming patients and the wounded as well. So I had to wait over there for a long time. And I look at the people, the overall impression of the people around that place. They were all terrified, and some of them had to decide to leave the center. The medical staff had to pack their stuff and left for their home. But as for me, I had to stay behind because the person who was supposed to come and change the work shift with me had not yet arrived.
Quand est-ce que vous avez...
When did you hear that the Khmer Rouge had entered Phnom Penh? Did you yourself see any of the Khmer Rouge enter, or did you hear about their capture of Phnom Penh? How did you learn of their entry?
On that morning, I worked in the hospital as usual. I continued to treat the wounded who were sent to the hospital. Then on that morning, I continued to hear gunfires. And if I stood in front of, I stood facing the Olympic Stadium, I could hear the gunfires from every angle. But I did not believe that it was the exchange of fires, but it was a solo fires by one side or so, because I could hear later on the fire from only one side. It was at around 8 o'clock in the morning. I actually at that time wanted to know what was going on. I had a lot of work to do at the hospital, but I did also want to know about what was going on. I was quite curious about what people were talking to each other outside the premise of the hospital. So I left the premise of the hospital. I went to the southern part of the hospital, and when I got there, I looked through the fence. Then I saw the Khmer Rouge soldiers who were marching along the street from the west. And from a far distance from the soldiers, there were more soldiers coming in as well. So I could see them from a long distance, that there were tanks driven in the cities as well, and on that tank there were many soldiers, many Khmer Rouge soldiers, some of whom were carrying guns and pointing the guns into the air. And I also saw some soldiers who were carrying guns, but they did not wear a proper shirt. They actually were shirt off at that time. So they were marching into the city, and they would walk past Boracay, heading to the eastern part of Boracay. That's what I saw at the time.
Quand vous étiez...
Therefore, when you were outside the hospital, on the street, and you saw the Khmer Rouge pass before you, what did you do afterwards? What did you tell yourself? Were there any other hospital staff members with you? Did they return to the hospital? What happened afterwards?
When I left the premise of the center. Actually, it was not that far from the building of the center, and I looked through the fence. And when I continued to walk a little bit further, I saw from the distance the soldiers marching down. And I actually saw one of the Khmer Rouge soldiers went into the Boracay premise. He was dressed in black, and he also had black slipper as well, and he wear the Maoist cap. And he was carrying gun as well. He was walking into the premise of Boracay. And when he was inside Boracay, actually in Boracay promise, there was one building. If you came from the south entry, you would see that building standing to the right. And beside that building, there was a natural pond over there. And the Khmer Rouge soldiers who walked into the premise, when he got to the building, and behind that building there was a pond, as I said. Then the Khmer Rouge soldiers threw a grenade into that pond, and it exploded. And then he went into the guard post in front of the Boracay premise. And inside that guarding post, there were the guards. Approximately, there were 5 or 6 or 7 people. They lived there as families. Then the Khmer Rouge soldier went into that guarding post. And I intended to ask the Khmer Rouge soldier, because I was very curious about what the Khmer Rouge was doing. I had never met with the Khmer Rouge soldier. I did treat the Khmer Rouge soldier when they were wounded and they were sent to Praket Tok Mili Hospital, and I was a nurse over there. I treated them, but then I wanted to talk to the Khmer Rouge soldier, but unfortunately I did not have a chance to talk to him because he walked straight into the house. So he went there for quite some time, for about half an hour or so. I did not meet him. I stood there wanting to meet him, but for about half an hour or so, he went into that house, and then he left that house, and then he went straight outside of the Boracay hospital. But even if it has been half an hour already, when I look outside, there was still a Khmer Rouge soldier marching along the street. And when they went into that he went into that building, I saw a young girl, and at about 8 years old or so, and then the young girl over there was holding her sarong, and she was crying, and I was a bit terrified as well. I did not know what had happened to her, and I went back to my hospital.
Vous êtes rentré.
You re-entered the hospital. You returned to the operating theater. You met with some more staff at that point, and then what happened? What did you do? Did you continue your work? Because in your statement, you said, I was in the midst of operating. That would mean that you returned working. And perhaps you were in the middle of operating on people before you left the hospital.
Upon my return to the center, of course, people were still working in the operating theater. On the ground floor, there were approximately 50 patient beds, and there were space between each bed. But then I could also see the wounded who were lying along the corridor of the center and in front of the buildings as well. and we could not treat them all. In the Borikela Center, for your information, on the 17th of April 1975, I am telling the court what I saw, the overall situation I saw on the 17th April 1975. On the 17th of April, the dead body who were actually admitted to the center for operation, but they could not be saved and they eventually died. So there were many patients who died in the hospital at that time. And on the ground floors, of course, there were newly admitted victims. So upon my return from outside, I saw a young girl. Her stomach was cut open. I am sorry, when I recall this, it recall my miserable memory. I saw that lady, that young girl. She had her stomach cut open and her intestine came out of her body. And then I went inside and I took one of the small bowl, a clean bowl, and I put the IV inside, and I tried to insert the intestine back into her stomach. Then I chew off the stomach. And I still had a vivid memory of that scene of misery whenever I recall it. Then I went on to work in other places. I saw a person whose leg was lost and blood was still coming out of him, and at that time it was around 9 or 10. And I did not see any more incoming wounded. So the wounded patient stayed in that hospital, but at the same time, more and more medical personnel of the center had to leave the center because they were all terrified, because they heard gunfires and bombings everywhere. So people started to leave the center, but the patient was still there, and they were helpless. And for those who sustained light injury, they had their family taken them out of the hospital. They brought their own means of transport to carry them out of the hospital. I asked the young girl whom I had helped her earlier about the fate of her family, and she said that her parents were all killed and her brother was lying dead beside her, and she was there. So I was at that time had a very, very hard time to leave the hospital. There were so many wounded in the hospital, so I decided to leave behind, to stay behind in order to continue my work in the center.
Mr. Witness, therefore you carried on with your work. You weren't alone. Even if a good number of medical personnel had already left. How did you learn that you had to leave the hospital, you had to leave Phnom Penh? Who issued the order? Did the Khmer Rouge storm the hospital and inform you of this, or Was it other staff members from the hospital who had informed you of this? How did you learn about the evacuation order?
After that, there were medical personnel who came down from the operating theater, and people who left the building, particularly the building on the south wing of the center. I do not recall who was who at that time, and there was a person who talked from behind that there were soldiers forcing them to leave the hospital quickly. He shouted that we had to leave the hospital immediately because the Americans were about to bombard the area. So that's what I heard in Boracay at that time. At that time it was around 10 o'clock.
And then what did you do?
First, I thought about the young girl. The young girl that I did not finish my treatment on her because there was no proper hospital for her treatment. The place that I was there was not a proper hospital. She should have been sent to the Bracket Millie Hospital or the Risaikai Hospital. My mind was still thinking about her and what shall I do to assist her. And when I heard about the fact that we had to leave, I was thinking of what shall I do, because on one side I had to go and meet my wife. I should have met her, I should have left in early morning, but due to the many wounded I could not leave. So I did not know what to do in that situation, and that was around 10 o'clock. There were still many patients, and that all had to leave. However, at a corner of my mind, I was thinking that if we had to leave, that is when the Khmer Rouge arrived, then they would continue to provide a treatment to the patients. That's what I was thinking at the corner of my mind. And I was still so pitiful about that young girl, and I still can see her face in front of me. But on the other hand, I had to go and meet my wife, who is 8 months pregnant. So I had to find all means in order to go and meet my wife. Those people who were at the hospital pushed out the hospital beds with the patients still on the bed, and they were pushed outside. However, they were not all of them. I saw some while I walked out. As for the young girl I spoke about, I still can imagine and can see her face. She grabbed onto my shirt and begged me to carry her, to allow her to go with me, to come with me. But I did not know what to do. And even now, I still can see her face. So I went for my wife. She was at another corner. It was at the northeast of that hospital, as it was at a pastor library. So I ran to that direction, and I heard some shots being fired from that direction. And I saw people fleeing from that direction, and I was told not to go there, otherwise I would have been shot. So people were running to the south, and we were asked to head toward the National Road number 1. And I was undecided, as I still wanted to go and meet my wife at the Pasteur Road. So I ran along with other people to the street south of the Boracay toward the National Road number 1. But actually, my house was to the east of Mohammed Tray Pagoda, and I had to walk past that house. So I brought actually a shirt of my wife. So I brought that shirt with me.
Mr. Miasiran, if I understood you well, because maybe the people here present have not understood very well why your wife was on Street 51 while your apartment was in another neighborhood in the southern part of Phnom Penh. Can you tell us why your wife was then at the northern side of Phnom Penh that night and on the morning of 17 April?
The distance was not that far. That is the distance from the Mohammed Tray Pagoda to Pasteur Road. But at that night, I was on a guard duty, and my wife was living in a rental apartment to the east of the Mohammed Tray Pagoda. But when I was on guard at night, I did not want her to stay alone, as she was also pregnant. So I took her to my relative's house in Pasteur Road. And there were many other relatives also living in that house on the Pasteur Road. So I took my wife there, and I thought that in the morning I would go to fetch her and return her to our rental apartment. That was the reason why she was there.
D'accord.
Fine. So, of course, this didn't work out because you couldn't go all the way to where your wife was staying. And so you came back to your neighborhood, to your apartment. So what was the situation in your neighborhood then? This was the end of the morning or around noon or maybe 1 o'clock in the afternoon, based on what you're telling us. And were your neighbors still there? Were there Khmer Rouge units in the neighborhood? Can you give us a quick description of what was going on then?
When I broke off from the people who were running away from the Borei Kela compound when there were shots being fired, and actually people warned me not to go into that direction, so I reached my house at the east of the Mohammed Tray Pagoda. It was 10 a.m., 10 something. At that location it was quiet as people already had left. Those people near my house had already left. So I entered my house. I didn't know what to bring because along the road before I reached my house, those who were walking on the road in a rather chaotic situation said that we all had to leave for 3 days and that we had to leave quickly, otherwise we would be bombarded by the Americans. So upon hearing that, I was scared of the bombardment. I entered my house. I only brought one thing only, that is my wife's shirt. And I kept that shirt until I arrived at my wife's native village. So then I made my journey together with the people en masse on the road. And we reached the Munivong Boulevard. As for the Khmer Rouge soldiers, they were scattered, but they did not speak to us, and I did not know what they were doing. We saw them walking towards the east direction. So I, amongst other people, I actually saw the Khmer Rouge soldiers carrying guns. They carrying guns with aiming towards the air in a ready to shoot position. And I heard sporadic gunshots here and there, but it was not like a sound from a fighting. It could be a sound from guns being shot into the air. So I walked among other people, and upon reaching the Monivung Boulevard, it was so crowded. It was congested on that boulevard.
Mr. Miyasaran, so you left your house and you were then on Monivong and you saw Khmer Rouge units and you told us that they didn't threaten you directly. So what was the attitude of the people walking along? Were the people talking to each other? Did you have the feeling that everyone believed that there would really be American bombings? Did you really believe that the city was going to be bombed? Or did you already suspect that there might be another story behind this?
We'll speak frankly. At that time, I did believe that whatever I was told was the truth, that there would be a bombardment. And of course, I was scared of the bombs. And those people who were walking together with me, they were talking about the bombardment, and we just tried to leave as quickly as we could. Otherwise, there could be some death as a result of the bombardment. And we did not even reach Kabul Canal, and we heard the gun shots. It was the fighting erupted between a Khmer Rouge group and a soldier who did not surrender, and that soldier fought with the Khmer Rouge group. So we were all very scared, as we would be hit by a stray bullet from that fighting. So for that Khmer Rouge soldiers, there were about 7 or 8 of them, and one Khmer Rouge soldier was wounded, and the other soldier was shot and dead. I was trembled from witnessing this fighting. And of course, in my mind, I said the situation was precarious, and I hate to live among other people, and it was so crowded and so very hot, as we could not move that fast. By that time, it was around 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and amongst all those people, I saw a family with one old person, and that person was abandoned, as she was left on a bed nearby or alongside the road. The family just left that person alone there and left. And we walked until we almost reached the Monivong bridge.
So during this journey that lasted several hours, were things organized? Did the Khmer Rouge organize the process to help the people from Phnom Penh leave the city? Were you given, for example, water or something to eat? Or this aged person lying on the bed, was she assisted? Did any of the Khmer Rouge do anything? to help this person maybe leave the city? Can you tell us what you remember about this?
We were told to leave Phnom Penh because of the imminent bombardment by the Americans. That's what we were told by the Khmer Rouge. But in fact, there was no bombardment, so that was a lie. And while we were en route, there was no single person who gave us any assistance or support or give us water or food. We were like a flock of people, and nobody assisted anybody until we reached the Monivong Bridge. It was not a well-managed journey. There was zero support.
You also say in your application, it's the same ERN as I mentioned earlier, that you stayed for 2 weeks close to the Monivong Bridge. That is to say that you crossed the Monivong Bridge and you stayed at the lower end of the bridge for about 2 weeks. Can you explain to us why and how you were able to stay there? And then I will ask you, well, we'll proceed in steps. I will put further questions to you about this.
When I almost reached the Monivong Bridge, because of the narrowness of the bridge, the journey became even slower. On the left side of the bridge, I saw two dead bodies, and that even scared me more. And when we crossed the bridge, it took us a long time, and it became even almost dark. I myself were thinking that the Americans, even if they conducted the bombardment, it would not reach us because we already almost crossed the bridge. And the fact that the Phnom Penh residents were asked to leave Phnom Penh was not well organized. What I wanted to mean is that they did not care about us at all. They just asked us to live in Phnom Penh, and they would do something else after we left Phnom Penh. So I stayed on the other side of the bridge with a large number of people, and still at the corner of my mind, I'm still thinking that I would be returned in 3 days. There was still a hope that I would return in 3 days to Phnom Penh, as everybody was told that we should not bring much belongings or clothes because we had to leave only for 3 days. So I was on the other side of the bridge, that is on the east side of the bridge, with many people. And on that side, some of the houses were closed, and I did not know where the owners had gone to, but it was so crowded. And as for the Khmer Rouge soldiers, they traveled up and down. There were some trucks, and some of them were on bicycles, but they did not have any communication with us. And there was no sign indicating that a village chief, for example, in that area would assist us by giving us water or some food. No, there was no such assistance.
Pendant combien
For how long did people, let's say, cross the Monivong Bridge? That is, say, how long did it take for the Phnom Penh population to leave the city and to cross the Monivong Bridge? Was there a continuous flow for several days, or since you were able to see what was going on the bridge from where you were staying?
I talked about the 17th April, and now let we refer to the late afternoon of 17th April when I already had crossed to the other side of the bridge. And on the west side, there were still people who were attempting to cross the bridge. And I myself had to find something to eat, because it was already in late afternoon. I had not had my lunch. So when I was at the bridge, that is, there was a warehouse to the north of the bridge. That is on the west side. There was a sugar warehouse, and there were other people who went into the warehouse and got some sugar. So I did the same. I got some sugar. Let's say I stole the sugar. There were heaps of sugar. Everybody got some sugar. So I carried the sugar with me, and then I crossed the bridge. And I stayed there together with other people. And that night, there was still a continuous flow of people. It was so crowded as people were heading toward National Road number 1.
Can you explain to us how you survived during these 2 weeks when you remained on the lower end of the bridge with other people? How did you manage to feed yourself? How did you manage to find water? How did you find a place to sleep? What was the situation during those 2 weeks?
On the first day, that is 17 April 1975, it was rather strange as it was raining on that day. I didn't bring anything with me, but I got sugar that I took it from the warehouse. And there were some youth who were chasing a pig. Then they got that pig. And I did not know what happened to me, but I told those youths that the pig was my pig. So they thought that the pig belonged to me. So they asked me to kill the pig so then we could have some meat. And I said, okay, you go ahead. So those youths killed the pig and gave me half of the meat, but I did not take the internal parts of the pig. So I got pork, and then I exchanged some pork for rice. And that's how I went by for that evening.
And as far as drinking, during those 2 weeks, you found food, of course, but how did you go about it to find something to drink? How did you manage with the people on this bridge to find something to drink? Were you helped? Did the Khmer Rouge come to bring you water in jerry cans or so that you could drink?
There was no Khmer Rouge office offering us any water. No, there was none. And how can I find water? Actually, I went into the river to fetch some water. And I went to a nearby house to take a cooking pot and I cooked the pork. Because in my mind, I thought that, okay, I just tried to survive for 3 days and then I would return to my house in Phnom Penh. But after 3 days, there was no news calling us to go back into Phnom Penh. And I started to become suspicious. And I did not hear of any bombardment by then in Phnom Penh. I was thinking that maybe there could be a few more days before we were allowed to return to Phnom Penh. And I was thinking if I was not allowed to go to Phnom Penh, where would I go? Whether I should go to find my parents and relatives or to find my wife. There was no Khmer Rouge coming to tell us, directing us to go here or there, or to go and fetch water from here or there. There was no such assistance offered by the Khmer Rouge.
So after the 3 to 4 days when you were still hoping to return home in Phnom Penh, were any announcements made? Did you hear the Khmer Rouge saying something? And people who were with you, did some people who were with you cross the bridge in the other direction? Did you hear families say that some members of their family had been able to return to Phnom Penh?
So the 3-day period had passed. And I still had hope that I would be allowed to return to Phnom Penh. On the 4th day and the 5th day, there was an announcement on a mobile microphone calling for civil servants, soldiers, senior military officials to return to Phnom Penh to resume their work to rebuild the country because the war was ended. Such an announcement was made on a microphone, on a loudspeaker rather, and there were groups of people talking about this and that, and then people started to return to Phnom Penh. That is to return back across the Moriwong Bridge. By then, the flow of people was almost none. That is the flow of people from the west through the east direction. So I could observe that some families decided to return to Phnom Penh based on the announcement made on the loudspeaker.
So you were an official, and didn't you answer that call as a civil servant?
At that time, I was thinking that we had to leave for 3 days because due to the imminent bombardment, but that didn't turn out to be true. And for those people, only some family members returned to Phnom Penh and not the entire family. So I suspected that something was going on in Phnom Penh, and for that reason I decided not to return to Phnom Penh in my capacity as a medical staff. Because to me the situation was not right. Something was not right in my mind, because I considered what they told us that we had to leave only for 3 days, as the planes would bombard Phnom Penh. But there was no bombardment, there was no plane. So when they made an announcement on the 4th or on the 5th day for people to return, I did not return, because I was suspicious that something was going on. But I observed people started to return to Phnom Penh, but there were only like some members of the family, not the entire members of the family.
Et vous savez,
And do you know what happened to those who returned, those who answered the call?
No, I did not, because they went and they were gone. And the family members who were left behind were still waiting for them. And I did not know what happened to them, because I did not see anybody who returned and telling what happens to their family members. They went and they were gone.
monsieur, et d'après vous,
And why, in your opinion, did they not return to serve under the new regime?
At that time, I did not think whether those people who returned would serve the new regime. In my mind, and from my observation of the chaotic situation when people were forced out of the city, and that the bombardment turned out to be a lie, I formed my opinion that those people who returned would not be in a position to serve them. But that's just my observation, and I did not see them return at all. So I did not know what happened to them.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President, I see that it is 4 p.m. Do you wish to conclude today's hearing?
President, thank you, Council, for your observation. Lead co-lawyers, you are reminded that the time allocation for the lead co-lawyers and the prosecution is for 1 full session. And now we have consumed more than 1 hour of the time. So you only have half a session for questioning this civil party. Please try to make your questions efficient and more substantive to the facts before this chamber. And we observe that some of the questions try to elicit the personal opinions of this civil party. So please try to think of the question that you asked, even if there was no objection from the defense teams. The hearing of the testimony of the civil party is now adjourned and will be resumed on Thursday, the 22nd of November. That is Thursday next week, starting from 9 a.m. The chamber will continue to hear the testimony of Ms. Saran, and after that, we will hear the testimony of a civil party by the pseudonym CCP 105, who will be first questioned by the lead co-lawyers for civil party. Mr. Misaran, the hearing of your testimony has not yet concluded, and you will be invited to return next week on Thursday, 22nd of November 2012. Court officer, in cooperation with the WISU, please assist for the arrangement of the transportation for this civil party to return to his residence and have him return to this courtroom on the morning of Thursday, 22nd November 2012 at 9 a.m. Security guards were instructed to take the two accused, Nunchi and Kilsampon, to the ECC detention facility and have them return to the courtroom on Thursday, 22nd November 2012 next week prior to 9 a.m. The court is now adjourned.